Hello and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I am Joe Rocky, here with Father Boniface Hicks. And Father, I want to discuss something today that might be more down the realm of communication and maybe not so necessarily directly about the faith per se, as sometimes the way that we discuss it. And many times you can see this in conversation where someone will ask someone a question, the other person will give a response that is literally not the answer to the question, but the asker of the question is completely satisfied and they got what they wanted. So, um, that obviously is a breach in communication and not accomplishing it, but both people walked away satisfied. And then there's situations where you're not satisfied. You feel like someone was avoiding your question because they didn't answer it or they answered something incorrectly. And being in sales, basically, my life is coming down to asking people the right questions and answering the questions. It's a lot of communication in my life. So there are times where I have to delineate between what is this person actually asking me and what do they want to know. And a lot of this is just experience because when you're doing things a long time, you kind of know what people really want to know when it's their first experience with this. When they're a first time home buyer, they have different questions that are matter to them that are different in life that when they're a renter. It's just the way it is. And having done this enough, I have been there enough to understand that. So I kind of wanted to use this space to discuss when people are trying to ask something and they just can't figure out how to say it correctly, how essentially the priesthood realizes what you're trying to ask and what actually should be coming across and where our thought process should be and what the right questions are. And with you having an extensive knowledge of being a priest and helping people with spiritual problems, as you have been doing with me for years, trying to figure out, as you've said many times, I think what you're trying to say is X. And you guys have countless episodes of where you can go through and see examples of that. I wanted to just kind of highlight on what you feel some of the big ticket items are where people don't really know how to articulate what they're trying to say, or for various reasons. Mostly it's they just don't really know what they're supposed to be asking. That's been my experience in my life. And I wanted to give you a chance here to articulate that because I think it's something that as we're dealing with the basics and especially going off our previous podcast, how we ended it there about how we need to have a little bit more explicit advertisement that we're doing some things with Jesus here as we're living our lives in a virtuous way. How can we ask the right questions and then also answer the questions the way that they should be asked?
Well, I appreciate your humility, Joe, and your affirmation in terms of our podcasts. And um, I'm not sure that if it's actually a function of the priesthood per se. I spend a lot of my day meeting with people one on one and getting to know them and understanding what's going on in their hearts individually. And I think that's part of why I may be able to do that a little bit better than the average person. I just get to know a lot of people and hear how a lot of people are struggling in their spiritual life and the kinds of questions that they have, and so I can usually uh, bring some things together. But certainly, priests are formed to be and are educated to be experts in the spiritual life, and so we ought to have a pretty good sense of the landscape, and therefore in regard to the spiritual life and the moral life related to that, should have a good idea of what is important and then the kinds of places that people are falling short and may need some additional guidance and encouragement. And so in that sense, I think the priest as a spiritual director, which every priest should be in a very specific sense or in a general sense for a parish or whatever, is someone who should know what the paths are of the spiritual life, and so the ways that we go astray. And it wouldn't be different. You're that guy in the housing market, you know. I mean, if I have a house question, I'm going to give you a call. I don't even know what question to ask exactly. I just know I got this thing with my house, and you're like, well, is it you got some water leakage? No, no, it's like there's a draft, and oh, you got a, anyway, you know how houses are put together, and you know the list of things that it might be wrong, and you can guide me to even asking the right question or identifying the right qualities. And so in that sense, the priest or and priests are professionals. They're not the only people, just like you are a professional house person. But my dad's pretty good about that stuff. He's not a professional, so I wouldn't want to exclude expertise from other areas. And all of us, in a way, should become professionals of the spiritual life, because that's really important for us. Just like we should become professionals, experts at human life and relationships. And those are a lot of things that we're living in because we're human beings. Now, again, I because a lot of people come and talk to me because I'm a priest, I have a lot of relationships with a wide variety of people that normal people wouldn't have. And the focus of my conversations is always on these things. And so that's obviously going to give me some natural advantages in being able to explore some of the pathways of the spiritual life of our relationship with God. Um, so it's a great blessing, and I'm grateful. As we said when we started out this podcast, uh, your questions are probably a lot of other people's questions, and so without trying to second guess what everybody's questions are, if you're just sort of honest about your questions, and if you're just saying the things that are on your mind, then our conversations are probably going to be useful for a lot of people. And I think that's worked out very well overall. And we've covered a lot of really interesting things and talked about a lot of things that I think are also very practical. There's a real value to the conceptual framework in any area. It's good to have a whole list of things in your head about how houses are in general. But for most people, they only live in one house. And so they only really need to know what's happening in this house. That's what they really need to be experts about. And that would be true for us about our spiritual life too. We don't all need to be experts on everybody's spiritual life. We don't need to all have the whole conceptual framework of how these things are put together. But it can help as well. I mean, any house owner benefits from knowing houses in general, and then can apply that to his own house. And so I think we benefit from uh, knowing some of the conceptual framework. And of course, you and I have to talk in those terms to a certain degree, because I'm not just talking about your spiritual life. I am trying to talk in more general terms in ways that people can apply to their own lives. So I think it's a real blessing. We might ask the question, kind of related to our conversation the last time, where I just sort of rephrased your question about, do we just do what Jesus expects us to do? And the answer is yes. I mean, the basic answer to your question, of course, I can't answer anything in basic terms by just saying yes. And I just rephrased the question to help us approach it from a different perspective, which is, how do we find human fulfillment? And how do we respond to the deepest desire of our hearts? How do we seek eternal happiness and those things that really matter to us the most? Well, live the way that God lives. And then we went from there. In uh, a similar way, now I lost my train of thought. We were going along real well there. In a similar way, trying to figure out the way that we phrase the questions, or the things that we ought to ask or pay attention to, is it's a benefit that oh, that's what I was going to say. So why doesn't God just tell us these things individually? I mean, why have a priest? Why have an expert? Why have these conversations? Why require all these podcasts and homilies? And why do all of that? Why doesn't God just tell us directly? And in one way, he does. I mean, he gives us that revelation in scripture. He gives us a teaching magisterium to help us interpret that scripture. But he also wants us to make this journey together. He doesn't want us to make this journey alone. He wants to have a personal relationship with us. And that's indispensable. Everybody needs a personal relationship with God. Each of our relationships with God has a uniqueness to it, but he also wants us to do it together. He wants us to help each other. And so I'm fulfilling my vocation by helping. You're fulfilling your vocation by asking for help. And we actually support each other in that. If you didn't ask for help, I couldn't help you. And then I couldn't fulfill my vocation. I can't play my role if you don't play your role. And and that goes for you and your relationships. Sometimes your relationship is to be providing this, well, as you're doing through this podcast and the questions you ask and the people you talk to. That's part of your role, is also to share the faith. But you couldn't do that if there weren't people who needed you to share the faith with them. And so we really do make this journey together, and we really do need each other. And we should never feel ashamed that we need help, just as we should never exclude ourselves from helping other people. And so that's really, I think, a beautiful picture of how everything is supposed to unfold. And I'm grateful to you to be able to have these conversations. There are many things that I haven't really thought about until you asked me the question. And that helps me to think about it, and it helps me to live it better because you asked me. And, likewise, I think, well, anyway, I think we can all identify with that experience. There are a lot of answers that we didn't have until somebody had the question.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that, and your mind gets open into different pathways, and you're right. Once you do something long enough, you tend to know where the direction that people tend to want to go is, and in many regards, I have an extra advantage because when we're specifically talking about houses, I can look at something and see it. Um, you can't really look at your relationship with God. You can look at someone to an extent, and how they interact with each other and go, okay, those guys have a functioning relationship, or whoa, there's some problems going on there. And you can just kind of see that with people at a distance. But you can't really see that with God. So what I wanted to think was, when people bring, like, what are some of the specific common questions that people bring to you that just normally are articulated wrong, that like literally what they're asking is not what you answer, but it's the question they actually meant. Because I think that, as you just said, when we think about these things, it opens up thought processes to questions we might not have other thought, and then they take us to other directions of better and prudence, better thinking of how to deal with these problems. And so I wanted to go into some of the specifics of what are people bringing you, and what are they actually meaning when they, or what are they actually trying to ask when their words are fumbling, as I'm doing right now.
um, well, I want to just first playfully push back a little bit on, you said, when it comes to a house, I can see it, but you can't see the load bearing on the house. You can't see the force of gravity. You can't see the wear and tear over time. You can't see. There are a lot of things you can't see, but you know them. Now you've seen some evidence of them, but we do see. So this is where our psyche and our bodies are the expression of our soul. Now it's not a perfect expression. We have some disintegration, and so uh, our bodies do fall apart eventually, and there will be a rupture, and that's what we call death. But they do express something. We see in our bodies. You just smiled, and I know something about what's happening in your soul because I saw that smile. So we do pick up those things from the outside, and that's the same is true to a certain extent with houses. You don't necessarily dig into all the foundations, and you don't dig into the walls and look at all the plumbing and the electricity, but you know what's back there because you know how houses are built. So now, again, it's not a perfect analogy. The soul is more complicated than a house, but um, at the same time, there is a real analogy there, and we start to get to know what's going on under the surface in one thing by living in our own house, right? That's always our starting point. We get to know our own house. We get to know our own soul. We get to know what's happening inside of our own body to a certain extent. And then we start to extrapolate and we learn things from other people. And so, what are the questions? And um, the really most meaningful questions are things like, am I loved? Does my life matter? Is my life going somewhere? Are there good things for me? Um, you know, those kinds of questions. What happens after my death? Uh, what happens to the after the death of my loved ones? Those are the really, really important questions, and we do well to come back to those uh, regularly, really, to see how we can come up with philosophical answers to those questions. There's a right answer for the question on the exam in Philosophy 101. But how do I apply those questions to my life? Do I know that I am loved, that I am infinitely loved, that I am unconditionally loved? Do I know that my life really matters, that it's really valuable? Do I know that uh, it makes a difference that I'm here? Do I know that I have a personal vocation, that there's something that I'm meant to do on this earth that is specifically for me and that nobody else can fulfill? Do I know that there is a loving God who awaits me after my death, and that he wants me to live with him forever? Those are really important questions that we need to come to terms with. And it can be scary to look at those things, but a lot of times that's the sort of thing that's under the surface when people are talking to me. And one of the things I can do for them, and this is a benefit of also being a representative of Christ, and I am that in a very visible way, as well as people who know what the priesthood is, they trust that. But I can help them to feel valuable and loved and feel like their life matters and that it's going somewhere. I can speak that truth to them. And I can also, by giving them attention, listening attentively and valuing what they have to say, exploring their experience, and thus helping them to value their experience as something that's worth exploring, and encouraging them when they admit that they've fallen and they confess their embarrassing failures, helping them to feel God's mercy by communicating that through my own person. And and I do that in a particular way for people as a priest, but you also do that, or you have the potential to do that, Joe, and so do so many of our listeners in regular interactions. You can now the average contractor doesn't become vulnerable to you in the way that a penitent becomes vulnerable to me, obviously. But there are real moments of grace in the context of your work, that somebody fails and admits it, that somebody tries their best and you see that it's not the best that you hoped for. When you can see that you're really working well with somebody who is has their own inadequacies or maybe loses their temper from time to time, but you're able to be patient with them and help them to feel that flaw doesn't condemn them. You're able to see the good that people do and affirm it and make them feel like, wow, I am good at this and my life matters, that I can do something well, and that makes a difference to people. So there are a lot of those human interactions that speak into some of the most important questions that, again, we often don't formulate. We don't ask ourselves these questions out loud, and we don't ask other people these questions out loud, but they're the things that are boiling under the surface and the things that are really important to us. And we have a chance to answer those questions in an experiential way, not just with ideas, but with a real experience of feeling loved, meaningful, forgiven, that there's hope for me, that my life has a purpose. We can help others to feel that way. And at times in the day, we can really take hold of when we feel that way, when others have said something or we have been able to do something that we think, this was really valuable. It's good that I'm alive. I have something to offer in this world. And those are really powerful experiences.
And on that note, thinking about it is incredibly valuable. I don't want to discount that, because as you go through that process, your experiences are drowned into it, and you can think things through and get a couple more steps downfield into the depth of your question, and figure something out. So in my world, it can be, why is this floor over here slanting? And I can go through almost a checklist in my head of what are the common things that cause this to happen. Well, they all seem like they're working. So what are some other options? And it digs you deeper into this. So obviously there's a lot of big questions you just asked there. You know, am I loved in as being a chief one there is being, well, when I love other people, how do I show it? So therefore, by the way that I'm showing it, how should I expect it back to me? And then is that reasonable to expect that? Is what I'm doing outwards reasonable? And then these types of expressions, are they correct? Are they incorrect? And those kinds of thought expressions of going through that really do lead you to deeper answers, and just from a mental process works. I mean, obviously, as you said here, I do it with a lot of. You're doing it in the spiritual realm. I'm doing it more in the construction side of things and in the sales side of things and things like that. But the concept and thought process itself still works very well. You know, last episode we started with it with you going through that process of going through what the correct question is, and it's something that I'd invite everyone to do as we're moving forward throughout this week to think of something that, as you said, you have importantly, but it's bubbling under the surface, and to dive into it. And we all have that natural thing of it's uncomfortable, so I don't really want to do this. You know, the fear of I've never gone down a water slide that's this big. Do I really want to do it? And there's this panic in your chest and you don't really want to do it, but then someone behind you just yells go, and then you just, next thing you know, you're halfway down the hill. And it's a good thing, and things are better off for it. So spend time doing it. Do it in a quiet place, with preferably less physical stimulus around you, and the answers will come to you. And that's another form of prayer, as we have discussed many times throughout this the life of this podcast. So we thank everyone for being with us here throughout the course of this episode. We will be with you again here next week. And as always, please continue to rate and share us on whatever subscriptions site you are using, especially if you're using one by Apple. Please especially give us a review, but if you can't even do that, the star rating is very valuable as well. Thank you all, and we'll be with you again next week.